And he's loose again. Edwards off the running. Pumped it back down to Edwards. They hand it off to Johnson. Boise State has won. Right now, and they take a downfield shot. And the catch is made. It's Ryan Williams. Shoots and he's free. Touchdown.
All right, everybody, welcome in to another edition of the Gridiron Uncensored podcast. We got a special guest tonight, Ryan Satkowiak, coming over from the Inside The Pylon podcast and show. And, we just appreciate you coming on, man, talk some Notre Dame football. And, we're deep in the podcast, in the preview season. It's that time, and we've been rolling through the Big 12, and I'm glad to get to Notre Dame because there's a lot to like about this team. And even from, the outside looking in, some people might be questioning, some parts on this team, maybe some losses on the offensive line. We'll talk all about this stuff. But I think those that are just watching from the outside, I think they're going to be surprised by what they see from this team in 25. Let's go ahead and look, 2024, obviously, led off, they got to the national championship, but the road to there started off a little bumpy with that Northern Illinois loss. Myself included, a lot of people were, questioning, okay, is this going to be a trend for, Freeman going forward? But he really turned it on. And I think he showed a lot of growth and development as a coach. What do you think about Marcus Freeman and, just the job that he did to get Notre Dame, to recover from that?
Yeah, it was quite literally the highest of highs and the lowest of lows in back-to-back weeks. And I've seen some stuff with this program in 25 years following it, but I don't know that there's ever been whiplash quite like that. You talk about a fan base who, Brian Kelly has had times at Notre Dame where you look at and you say, that was a high point moment. That was a good quality win. Oklahoma 2012 comes to mind, but this is a program, a fan base that has had, we can say that in the past tense now officially, been starved for that signature win moment. And to get it opening weekend on the road in SEC country in primetime in that environment, and we saw after the game, the pregame video of him in the tunnel before the game, screaming at the fans, screaming at his players, get fired up. That felt like a breakthrough moment for this program. And for 6.5 days later to have the Northern Illinois fiasco happen, it was crushing. It was defeating. It was, you can go back and listen to our week 2 recap. And I think the first 30 minutes of that podcast was me ranting and raving about this guy's not cut out for the job. And I think for a lot of Notre Dame fans who, I've been even through the first 2 years with Marcus Freeman, some of the ups and downs, I was very much look, I was one of the people in the camp that was, hey, you got to give this guy time. I think, we could go into a long expose of what, the reality of what he inherited versus kind of the perception of, well, he inherited a healthy program. That's true. He inherited a much better program than Brian Kelly did, but there were some significant deficiencies, particularly off the offensive side of the football with this team. And that kind of came out in the worst way in the first season, specifically with how the quarterbacks played. But in year 3, you have to take ownership of that. Having a Marshall in year 1 when your starting quarterback gets injured in the third quarter. And they had pretty much already lost the game by that point. So it's not like that lost them that game, but to have that in year 3, when it's your guy at quarterback, it's your handpicked offensive coordinator that the administration forked over one of the richest coordinator contracts in FBS to lure him from LSU.
Yeah.
And to score 14 points against NIU in year 3 was just unacceptable. And I think for a lot of people who had been staunch Freeman for supporters, I think that was kind of a sobering moment where a lot of people had doubts for the first time about, is this going to work? And then that leads to the next logical question. Well, if this guy's not going to win here, then what the hell do we do next?
Right.
So I think there was a lot of soul searching in the fan base. I definitely in the football program, but for sure in the fan base after that NIU game. And, you get Purdue the week after that, and we know what Purdue ended up being. So you kind of look at that and you're like, whatever. But, 2 weeks later against Miami of Ohio, not the U, the Red Hawks, I guess MAC runners up. They didn't exactly look that great in that game either. They got booed off the field at halftime.
Yeah.
And, they righted it a little bit in the second half. I mean, it was kind of a throwaway game over the course of the season, but in the context of where they were at that time, the season really could have gone off the rails at that point.
Absolutely.
But it didn't. And then you get Louisville the week after that. And again, they fumble the opening kickoff. It was funny. We were going to a wedding and we were driving down to Toledo, and I pulled the game up on my phone, and I ended up pulling it up a little late because I'm used to the NBC start at 3:40 or whatever. And it was 3:37. I distinctly remembered I pulled it up and Louisville had already scored a touchdown. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So like those 3 weeks, I mean, the 2 of the 3 weeks after the NIU game, I think the season really could have gone off the rails, and they rebounded well. They withstood some pretty significant injuries over the course of the season, and then they just got stronger and stronger as the season went along. And a lot of the experience on the defensive side of the ball really helped with that. Having the leadership of Riley Leonard really helped with that. And as he got more comfortable in the offense, I think that side of the ball started to feed off of that a little bit more. And
Yeah.
it was kind of like a snowball at that point. And then aside from kind of the hiccup of the USC game at the end of the regular season, they really weren't challenged the rest of the regular season, and
Yeah.
able to ride that momentum into the playoff. And the injuries kept piling up, and it felt like they got to a point where they finally crossed the bridge too far with the Penn State game, but they were able to pull that one out, and then they met a unstoppable force in Ohio State there, unfortunately, at the end.
Yeah.
But
And even still, that was close.
I mean, even in that game too, right? Like they come out of the second half and you think, well, they get a stop here. They have a chance, and they immediately give up a 70-yard run, give up another touchdown. And well, I'm going to bed early tonight, but they found a way to gut back into that game. And, you go one-on-one against Jeremiah Smith. That's not a winning proposition often, but they got to stop there. They're getting the ball back with 2 minutes left and a chance to tie the game. So, I mean, that was, I think, all in all, I know it was kind of an unremarkable schedule aside from that Texas A&M game, and then obviously the playoff run. And the playoff run certainly was nothing to scoff at, but there weren't really a lot of high watermarks, like moments within the season where you can point at and say, wow, that was a big moment in the season. But I think just the way that they battled overall, withstood a numerous number of injuries, withstood, the loss to NIU, where I think under some of the Kelly teams, or even really that first year Marcus Freeman team too, that could have crippled them. And the way that they were able to rebound to not let that define them and instead turn it into kind of a rallying cry throughout the rest of the season. Like, hey, we're not going to let that happen to us again. We remember the pain of NIU. We don't want to feel that again. And they didn't feel it again until the very last game of the college football season.
Yeah, it really remarkable turnaround. And you mentioned the injuries, and I swear it's like week after week, something would pop up, some injury. And I'm like, I don't know how they can continue. How are they going to sustain this, momentum that they're trying to build back? After Georgia Tech, even that's a good win. Even Navy was a big game at the time because Navy was coming off. They were, they were ranked, and everybody's like, okay, the injuries have started, kind of mounting, but Riley Leonard, you mentioned, he was kind of getting into the groove at that time, and they went off and popped them 51-14. And the rest is history. They got down, they beat Indiana, Georgia in the playoffs, and then like you mentioned, Penn State. So really a nice playoff run. Ended not the way you want it to, but this team's set up for 2025 to really maybe get back to that spot. And you look at a couple of coaching changes, not Chris Ash coming in at defensive coordinator, Sider at halfback coach. I think that's a good one. I think it's already showing off on the recruiting trail. So what do you think, moving from 24 into 25, the coaching staff, you happy with the changes that have taken place? Do you think it can propel them, into that national title race again?
Well, the Chris Ash hire is a very fascinating experiment in the Marcus Freeman coaching tree, because it feels very much like how the Al Golden hire felt 3 years ago, where you're pulling a guy from the NFL ranks who's a position coach. And I don't know if Ash was technically a position coach. I think he was more of an area scout for Jacksonville by that point in his career. But a guy whose most notable college experience, looking back on it, was a failed head coaching gig at Rutgers. And I know that didn't exactly play out the same way that Al Golden's did at Miami. Those circumstances were a little bit different in how those 10 years failed. But I think it was just kind of an underwhelming name at the time, much in the way that Al Golden's was. And, maybe Al Golden has a little bit more shine because he was coming off a Super Bowl run with the Bengals at the time, but he was a guy who hadn't called a college defense since I think 2004 with Virginia by the time they hired him,
It's been a
and
while.
it had been a minute. And his notable college experience was, well, this was the guy who bombed out at Miami and got fired very spectacularly and then sued the school. And the same thing with Chris Ash. He had a stint with Texas in 2020, and I think it didn't go particularly great, but that was not a fantastic Texas team at the time.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to really put stock into anything that happened during that calendar year, given
I
everything
agree.
else that was happening in society at that time. But
Yeah.
I think it's a fascinating hire in the sense that it seems like when these guys go off to the NFL, they get a little bit more of a big picture perspective on the sport, and it kind of breaks them out of, their old college ways. They see the sport in maybe a little bit of a different light, and
Yeah.
it's one of those things too where, you see the articles that these guys on the beat are writing where they're getting in touch with, Urban Meyer, who speaks highly of him, old Ohio State
Mhm.
players who are speaking highly of him and crediting them for the turnaround that they made in that season where they won the national championship with him as a co-defensive coordinator. And, people on the Ohio State beat talking highly of him, and, Ohio State fans talking highly of him too, saying, yeah, we were sad to see him go. It's not rare, or it's pretty rare. I feel like you see that.
I
So I
agree.
think it has a chance to work out in a similar way. I definitely think the defense takes a little bit of a step back. It's hard to say that it's going to play out as well as last year's did, not
Right.
only because you get it's getting a coordinator like Al Golden with that level of success for 3 years is rare for sure. Especially with the experience that they had on that defense, right? We're not just talking about guys who had been in the system for a period of time. We're talking about a lot of 5th and 6th year guys who are no longer with the program,
Mhm.
high level learners, guys who had finished up most of their schooling. So most of the time they are basically functioning as, NFL light players where they're quote unquote majoring in football, where they're devoting a lot of time to film study, a lot of time to practice, learning schemes, learning looks, and listening just to a Notre Dame podcast today, and they're talking about, the nonverbal communication on this unit last year was fantastic, where guys could give each other a look and they knew what they were going to do.
Right.
And when you're combining what is no longer on this defense with a new play caller, I think it's natural that is going to take a step back. And if you look at Al Golden's first year with the Irish, it was a little bit of a mixed bag early. The double safety blitz at Ohio State that let them score the game-winning touchdown in the third quarter still talked about a lot in those circles. So there were some up and down moments, but it was a unit that got stronger as the year went along. But then it had a low watermark at the end when Caleb Williams solidified his Heisman against the Irish in the last game of the regular season. So I don't know if it'll be quite that pendulum-y. They still return a lot of really good pieces on this defense. They
Absolutely.
return, other than Al Golden, I do believe the entire coaching staff defensively, other than maybe a couple of analysts or assistant coaches, returns. So there should be good continuity on the staff.
Mhm.
But anytime there's a new play caller, there's always going to be some questions with that and how he adjusts to the scheme. And again, adjusting to
Absolutely.
the college game as well. And, there's no warm-up game on this schedule. He's got to go right into it right away.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's one thing that people put down Notre Dame schedules, and this year I don't see how anybody can. Even in the past years, they've always being an independent. It's hard to you got to schedule all these out of conference games. Through the Power Four, you do get a couple of the Group of Five types, but for the most part, this is a tough schedule in 2025. And like I said, we'll talk more on that, towards the end of the show. But yeah, there's no warm up, like you said. But overall, I think the continuity of the staff looks pretty good. You do have the changeover on the DC, but even if it takes a week or two to get rolling, I mean he's been around. He's I think it's going to be just fine with the talent that Notre Dame has on the roster. And talking about talent, we can go ahead and jump in, talk about the portal. When you look at, a lot of some of the teams that we've covered already, throughout the Big 12, massive portal classes. I mean, we're talking 40, 50. Notre Dame's, they're not rolling that way. They don't need to because they recruit well. And that's something we always talk about, to be a championship caliber team, you have to recruit well and then plug from the portal. And Notre Dame's really doing that. They only bring in 8 and you only lose 14.
Mhm.
And what you bring in is a lot of, in my opinion, important pieces, good talent. Guys like Devontae Smith on the back end, Malachi Fields at wide receiver to shore up that position. Elijah Hughes in the middle. On the defensive line, Jared Dawson, is probably going to be somebody that you need to watch for. So what do you think on this portal class? I know the losses on the offensive line from the outside looking in seem to hurt a lot. But I think when you see what they've done over the recruiting, span of the last couple of years, that they're still just going to be fine. What do you think on it?
Yeah, the offensive line discourse that happened immediately after the national championship game was a little comical to watch from an inside, quote unquote, insider's perspective,
Yeah.
and everyone freaking out like, what's going on in Notre Dame? They're losing all their offensive line starters. Well, they were starting because they had 3 injuries on the offensive line.
Right.
And it's one of those situations, would you like to have those guys back? Yes, you very much would. From a depth perspective, the ability to say, hey, we are legitimately too deep across every position on the offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to worry about this unit at all this year. That would be fantastic. In 2025 college football, that's just not feasible. Aside from Sam Pendleton, who went to Tennessee, Pat Coogan, the center, and Rocco Spindler, who I believe was primarily right guard last year. 5th-year guys. This is going to be their last chance to make an impact in the college game before they head off to the NFL. So you get a little bit more NIL money to transfer somewhere else. You get a more or less guaranteed starting job. That's a very difficult thing to pass up when you go to you're going into your exit meetings with offensive line coach Joe Rudolph, your head coach Marcus Freeman, and they're saying, look, we can't guarantee you anything next year. You're not going to stick around for that. And I think every Notre Dame fan understood that. I don't think any Notre Dame fan blamed any of them. I'm going to be rooting for Pat Coogan for life. I love that guy.
Yeah.
The pregame speeches were legendary.
Yeah, I was going to say he got popular, on social media from some of those.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, that's great stuff. And yeah, what do you expect? They're not just going to sit there anymore.
Right.
It's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah. And it's a position that Notre Dame really is not going to have to be worried about for the foreseeable future. That was a unit that was a question mark going into last year because of the lack of experience, and all those guys got playing time. The biggest question is just going to be the health, given that your starting center is coming off a torn ACL by the time the season starts. I think he'll be about 11 months post-op by that point, given the nature of the position. He should be fine to go. It's not like we're expecting him to be making any cutbacks in the open field or anything like that.
Right.
Billy Schrouth, who started at the other guard position, I believe had another he had an ankle surgery in the offseason to a high ankle sprain. I think it was against Georgia Tech that he missed a couple of games and then played through the rest of the way. So he should be healthy and ready to go. The big one was Charles Jagusa, who we joked about this when we did a Notre Dame episode a couple of weeks ago with Jack Sobel from On3. The thing that really illustrated to me the length of the last college football season was Charles Jagusa tore his pec on the 3rd day of fall camp, and it was purported to be a season-ending injury. And then he came back to play against Penn State in the Orange Bowl, and then started against Ohio State in the national championship game. So he should be healthy and ready to go too. And then you return both tackles. Anthony Knapp, obviously he got hurt in the Orange Bowl against Penn State. I think may have had a cleanup procedure. He was a little bit limited in spring, but sounds to be a full participant in summer. And then Amo Wagner on the bright side, no issues there. He's good to go. So offensive line is really not a position that I am worried about. It should be one of the best units in the country this year. But in terms of the other portal class in general, this seems to be the theme with Notre Dame is it's usually in like a 6 to 8 guy class that features one specialist and then guys that are just filling out the rest of the roster. And they've progressively got better at recruiting the receiver position in the portal. It started with 2 years ago with Caleb Smith from Virginia Tech, who medically retired in spring ball. Then last year was Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, and Jaden Harrison, who the biggest play of the 3 was a kick return by Harrison in the Sugar Bowl. And otherwise, it was a fine season. I think Notre Dame fans became very aware why Clemson fans were so frustrated with the Bo Collins experience, because the talent was tantalizing. He would make incredible catches and then disappear for 2 to 3 games at a time. This year, I think the experience and the big level experience is the big key there. You touched on Malachi Fields, who despite Virginia's abysmal passing attack last year, still had 50 catches and 800 yards.
Yeah.
So he should, he's a body type that they do not have on the roster, a big, strong, quick guy on the outside who can go up and make a contested catch. That's a distinct kind of foil to what seems to be a very slot heavy team with the type of receivers that they've been able to bring in. And Will Pauling is a guy who's that as well, more of a small, quick inside slot guy. But again, a guy who 2 years ago for Wisconsin, we're going to forget about last year and the passing attack that was the Wisconsin Badgers offense, but 2 years removed from a 74 catch season. So these are two guys who have produced at the Power 4 level and have produced well. So they're going to need it, man. This isn't like last year's attack where you get 3 games into the season, you realize your passing game, your wide receivers aren't what you thought, and you're just going to go bully ball with Riley Leonard in the run game. You're going to need to throw the ball a little bit this year because you do not have that athlete and that running threat at quarterback. So that'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. Fields was not with Notre Dame in the spring. He was finishing up his degree with Virginia. He'll be there in the summer. I believe he had a surgical procedure to correct a sports hernia. So will be interesting to see how he is healing from that. And then Pauling was a little bit limited in spring due to a 5th metatarsal fracture that I believe was surgically fixated as well. So that didn't really have an opportunity to develop chemistry with a new quarterback. So that's a little bit concerning, but they did have a couple guys step up, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute. But then on the defensive side of the ball, you touched on Devontae Smith. That's that nickel position, that's a big part of the Irish defense. They aren't really a true 4-2-5. They'll still run a little bit base 4-3, but with just kind of the nature of college offenses these days, they're in nickel a lot more than they are 4-3. They were a lot better last year running nickel than they did 4-3. The position that Jordan Clark played very well last year, Devontae Smith, a little bit more of a physical player. He's not a huge guy, but he's bigger than Clark was. So sounds like he'll fit very well into that defense. The other big addition on the back end was Jalen Stroman from Virginia Tech, who missed most of last year with, I believe, a clavicle fracture. Had to have that refixated in the spring, so he missed most of spring. So that was kind of the theme of the transfer portal additions was a lot of re-injuries getting old injuries getting fixed up in the spring. But will be interesting to see. They have a big hole to fill at that safety position, so they'll need either Stroman or someone else to step up. And then you touched on Elijah Hughes in the middle. They don't need him to be a guy, but if he can be part of that rotation there, that'll be a big help to that interior, that defensive line.
Yeah, and just building the depth, back, and you mentioned the offensive line, and we can just go ahead and move into offense. A reason that it's obvious it's not a concern. They didn't go out and get anybody on the offensive line from the portal. They know what they have, and the coaching staff likes what they have on their roster. There's no concern to Freeman in the group. When you look at the offense for Notre Dame, you mentioned Riley Leonard leaving, and that's a huge hole to fill with the running production. You touched on that. How do they replace that? Running backs, obviously you got Jeremiah Love. He's coming back at one of the top backs in the country. And then quarterback battle. It's got to be CJ Carr, right? I know there's the conversation about, well, do you let the young guy? I think you do. I mean, you recruit him. He's a high caliber dude. Let's run it. What do you think about this offense? Their potential with Carr should probably be the guy. And then at least from the outside looking in, and then the weapons that are around him, the wide receiver room we touched on, some other guys that are already organic to the team, that are stepping up. What do you think about this offense, and can they kind of get past losing the production from Leonard?
Yeah, it feels kind of cliche to say because you can say this for pretty much every college football team, but it's going to hinge on the quarterback, right?
Yeah. Every team.
It's funny to think out loud though, because we're also 2 years removed from them winning 8 games with Drew Pine playing quarterback. So in theory, you don't need a supremely functional passing game to win when you have a running game and an offensive line like this. But if this team is going to reach a similar height to which they did last year, they're going to need the passing game to step up because you don't have the Riley Leonard 3rd and short cheat code where you run quarterback power twice and pick up the first down 65% of the time. That's just not going to be a feature of this year's playbook. I personally would be floored if it's anyone other than CJ Carr starting, and by anyone other than CJ Carr. At this point, we're talking about Kenny Minchie as Steve Angeli is off to Syracuse. He will, however, likely start a game in Notre Dame Stadium this year with the on senior day, no less. But
which is
I think
crazy.
if what you can take solace in as a Notre Dame fan is regardless of who wins the job, you are likely going to have them for 2 or possibly 3 seasons, which has not happened since the Ian Book days. He was the last 2-time back-to-back
Wow,
season
yeah, that's
starter. Um, I mean, unless it's Minchie winning the job and then he plays so well that he decides to go to the NFL, which if that happens, you're happy because it means you probably won a national title. But
yeah.
the talent of Carr is undeniable. Minchie has a really good arm. I think the question with him is still decision making. He's a little bit better of I don't want to say a better athlete overall. I think Carr's a good athlete in the way that you would think. I can't think of a good comp for him. I'm not a big NFL guy, so this is a little outside of my scope. But he's athletic in the sense that he can move around in the pocket and evade pressure, but he's not athletic in the sense that he's going to roll out on 3rd and 11 and hurdle Malachi Starks to get a first down. That's not
Right.
CJ Carr. Not necessarily Kenny Minchie either, though. There is a little bit more of that in his game. Carr more of a pure pocket passer, very good arm. He looked fantastic in the spring game. I get it's a spring game, but there were a couple of passes that made you sit back and go, "Ooh."
I Yeah, I saw some of the clips and they were clean, man. They were nice looking passes, very
It
crisp.
it was not. I have not seen a ball like that from a Notre Dame quarterback since 2015 DeShone Kizer. So if that's kind of the floor from the passing game, I think that's a good place to start because the running game should still be fantastic, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
what they're still likely going to lead on still. You have to be better to throw with the passing game to open up that run because, again, you don't have that quarterback run or quarterback scramble threat as much as you did last year.
Yeah.
But when you have what should be one of the best offensive lines in college football that now has essentially a full season playing together, plus minus Jagusa, who missed all of last year, plus one of, if not the best returning running backs in college football, plus a backup running back who might be one of the best 10 to 15 running backs in college football, plus a running back who was a really good third down specialist for you and had a great game against Penn State and probably helped kickstart that comeback on that first drive out of the second half. Plus your third down back from 2023 who tore his ACL last year is coming back. Plus you have a redshirt freshman who is built like Audric Estime, who would probably play a significant role on 2/3 of the Power 4 teams in the country. They are loaded at running back.
Yes. It's one of the deepest rooms, if not the
Mhm.
deepest room in the country.
I'm shocked they didn't lose anyone to the portal. And I mean, when you think about it, it kind of makes sense why, because you're assuming Love is gone after this season. I would be shocked if he came back.
Yeah.
Price is likely off to the NFL after this season as well. So there's going to be competition to be, 1A, 1B in this locker room. Sider is a guy, I'm not intimately familiar with the Penn State running back room outside of the top 2, but Sider was more of a guy who was just pound the rock with the top 2 guys. He wasn't as much spread the wealth out, whereas
Mhm.
previous running back coach Dylan McCullough had a famous job board in the running backs room where I think it was 9 specific jobs, and he had not each running back had a specific role, but there was a role assigned for each job. So in theory, that's how Jabron Payne becomes your third down running back in 2023 when you have an Abrams tank like Audric Estime still on your
Yeah.
roster. So I'm going to be interested to see, especially early in the season when they have some of these tougher games, how that carry distribution plays out.
Sure.
One of their big recruiting pitches when it was still McCullough as the coach to Love was, we're not going to overuse you because we want you to have tread on your tires for the NFL. And he's been on record saying, I don't want an Ashton Genty workload. I want to be
Sure.
fresh for the NFL. And they don't need him to have that workload with this running back room, but it'll be interesting to see how Sider divvies up the carries within this offense. But the running game should be good, but the passing game is, again, just going to be the question mark. The strength of this offense in the passing game traditionally has been tight end, and that's going to be a little bit of a question mark this year. They are alarmingly thin at the position. Cooper Flanagan tore his Achilles against Georgia, so they went out to
Yeah.
the portal. They got Ty Washington from Arkansas. He's more of an inline blocker type guy. Out wide, Eli Raridan, he of 2 previous ACL injuries, is looking to be the number 1 guy. Not as good of a blocker, more of a pass catching
Mhm.
threat, and he looked good in the spring. And reports around him, like his recruiting profile was athletic freak, should be a really good pass catcher. Didn't see a lot of that so far his first 3 years, which again have been marred by 2 significant knee injuries.
Yeah.
But it sounds like he's coming back into that a little bit. If they can get a significant role from him this year, that would be a huge boon to this offense. But
Absolutely.
I think the biggest breakthrough on this Notre Dame team last year that kind of flies under the radar a little bit is how good Jaden Greathouse was in the playoff.
Yeah,
He was kind of billed as a breakout guy early in the season. He had a big drop against NIU that I think kind of shook his confidence a little bit and shook the coaching staff and Riley Leonard's confidence in him. And
sure.
he was kind of in no man's land for the middle part of the season, but made a couple of good plays late against some bad teams. I think that helped build the confidence in him. And then he exploded against Penn State. And then he did the same thing against Ohio State the week after. The big highlight against Penn State was the debate between the Notre Dame and Penn State fans on Twitter. Was it a juking out of the guy's shoes or did the guy just fall? I guess it doesn't really matter. It's the end result is the same, but he had a really good game against Ohio State, made some really good contested catches, which was not really something that he had done previously. So you pair that with Fields, and then in the slot, you have an alternation of Will Pauling and what should be now a healthy Jordan Faison, another guy that was the theme of last year was injuries. And, he got rolled up on against Texas A&M and missed a couple of weeks with a high ankle sprain and then re-aggravated it. So he really was not right for most of the season. And he's a quick, shifty, explosive guy. That really impacted him. And now that he's healthy, he needs to get stronger. But now that he's healthy, you at least have 4 guys that you can be confident in and that are going to go out there and, hey, we've seen these guys make plays before. We know it can happen. Can they do it consistently is going to be the question. And can the quarterback get them the ball without making too many mistakes is obviously the big question as well.
Yeah. And, that's the thing. Young quarterbacks, they tend to make mistakes, but it's how, he seems like CJ Carr should say, seems like he's a really down to earth kid guy. He seems really, focused on the game from, what I've seen from him, his play. And then, I feel like he's going to be all right in this offense. You get the wide receiver room that you talked about. They have more, I want to say depth, I guess, but like you said, in-game experience. And if, Greathouse can go off like he did and he carries that momentum over, I mean, those great targets for a young quarterback that he can put some trust in, that you work out over the summer and fall ball, you build that relationship. That's going to work wonders for this team. But again, you're going to lean on the run, I think, especially early while you're getting the quarterback really into the speed of, the play. And like you mentioned, it's not an easy start to this schedule. But you lean on that run game, and I think you're going to be fine with the offensive line and the rushing attack. Defensively, this is where I think they're loaded. I know there's some losses, but for real, this team is just plugging and playing, man. It's just reloading the roster, and that should keep them in pretty much every single game in on the schedule. What do you think on the defensive side? Is there really a big drop off?
If you were to think of a silver lining from all the injuries this team sustained last year, it's that what looked to be what would be a pretty significant drop off for 2025 in terms of your overall talent level doesn't appear to be as daunting now. The big one is obviously Xavier Watts at safety, former defensive player of the year, an All-American again last year. You don't have a like for like comparison with anyone on the roster who's like a ready-made replacement who's going to step up with that. You feel a lot better about the safety position than I think most people thought they would be after the 2024 season. They brought in Northwestern transfer Rod Hurd last year, and the assumption was he was going to start next to Watts. So you're going to have, the 5th-year Watts with the 6th-year Hurd starting next to each other, and you're going to have to replace that entire starting rotation. Well, sophomore Don Schuler in spring ball, when Rod Hurd was finishing up at Northwestern, just took the job and never gave it back. So you at least have a guy who started, 15, 16 games last year, who's back at that back end. He's more, I don't want to call him a true in the box safety, but that was a little bit more of his role while Watts played kind of that center field eraser role. So it'll be interesting to see if they move him over to that more Watts role and make him more kind of that center fielder of the defense, or if they rely on Stroman or one of the young guys to take that role and keep him up a little bit more as that traditional strong safety type. But you at least have a guy with experience back there. The other big one in the secondary was Benjamin Morrison. We anticipated that was going to be a first-round pick. He gets injured halfway through the year. and you replace him with a guy who beat Colin Simmons for Defensive Freshman of the Year. So that was a development that I don't think anyone saw coming with Leonard Boer's ascension last year. He is a fantastic player. Longer, more physical, bigger than Morrison is, faster than Morrison is. You know, the Judkins run in the national title game, he caught him and ran him down. He's so good, man. He is so good. So having that shutdown guy on one half of the field in the defense, that is a huge advantage for this back end.
Absolutely.
Then you look at the linebackers, you know, you lose Jack Kaiser, who he set the all-time record in games played in Notre Dame history, a record that will probably never be broken. I think it was like 69 or 70 games.
It's insane.
So you're concerned about just the experience loss. And again, a guy who wore the green button for you. He had the mic on the field. He was the guy who knew everyone's role. You need someone to really understand this Chris Ash system to be able to kind of replicate that a little bit. But in terms of talent, they're absolutely fine at linebacker. You know, you bring back Drake Bowen, who's a mean, physical, nasty player. You have message board favorite Jalen Sneed, a former 5-star recruit who was more of a see-ball, get-ball guy in high school, and it's taken him 3 years to figure out how to play linebacker. He finally started to click for him last year, and it sounds like in spring ball it's continuing to click for him. And if you can turn that guy into a legitimate weapon, it opens up a lot more in your defense. True sophomore Kingston Viliamuasa was fantastic as a freshman last year. Hurt his knee late in the season, ended up missing the USC and Indiana games, but came back and still played well in the playoff. Another supremely talented kid who they're going to play him next to Bowen a lot next year. Jaden Osbury as well. He kind of hit a wall towards the end of the year. I think he hurt his elbow and he hit a big bulky brace on for a little bit, but another guy who got a ton of experience last year. The question for me on this defense is going to be the line. They have bodies. Right. How healthy are they and what can they get in the middle? You know, the headliners on this unit last year were Howard Cross and Riley Mills, two guys who at the end of the year were either not playing or not at 100%. So you had to rely on a little bit more from the depth on your roster. And the issue for Notre Dame is they have not really recruited that defensive tackle position supremely well. So they bring in Jared Dawson from Louisville. He was a really good player last year. It'll be interesting to see how he fits in on this defense.
Yeah.
Gabe Rubio was a former top 100 recruit. He replaced Mills after he tore his ACL against Indiana in the playoff. And I thought he played pretty well, all things considered.
I agree.
Considering he was playing next to a 50% Howard Cross. He more than held his own. They get Jason Onye back, who missed most of last season due to personal reasons. It sounds like he is back full go, and it sounds like he's a captain for one of their summer workout group. So that's a huge positive development for the defensive line as well.
Yeah.
And then on the edge, this might be the most talented defensive end room that they have had since they had the Stephon Tuitt, Aaron Lynch experience in 2011, 2012. The issue is, are they healthy? So Jordan Botelho is a 6th-year guy. He was probably their best defensive player through 2 weeks and then tore his patellar tendon against Purdue. 2 weeks later, Bubakar Traore, who is a true sophomore, who's probably the best pure pass rusher on this team, tore his ACL against Louisville. Again, it happened early in the season. It's at positions where you're not needing them to be, open field, explosive, pivoting, cutting guys, but still 11 months post-op, you're concerned that they're not at 100% at the start of the season. They should get better as the season goes along. The issue is your two toughest regular season games are week 1 and week 3. So how are they going to be for that? Especially week 1 in that Miami Heat. They're going to need to be rotating a lot of guys through that. But
absolutely.
You get Josh Burnham back, more of a strong side guy, played a little bit of that rush end position last year, but was a guy who was hampered a little bit by an ankle injury. The true freak on this defense is sophomore Bryce Young, the son of former San Francisco 49er Hall of Famer Bryant Young. 6'7", 260, was a menace blocking kicks. He absolutely annihilated an up back, I think, during the Purdue game, and I'm not sure that they've pulled that poor kid out of the stadium turf yet, but he is a physical there. Yeah, you could kind of see it on the edge of the TV. You could hear the pad explosion, and then you could hear the crowd go, "Oh!"
It's one of my favorite sounds.
Yes, He got better as a pass rusher and as just like a overall defensive player. Pretty good at holding the edge as well last year. So you have a ton of talent on this unit. How they deploy it will be interesting to see, but the overall ceiling of this defense is going to be determined by the health of Botello and Traore. If they are like truly, legitimately 100% ready to go for Miami, I think this has the potential to be once again a top 10 overall defensive unit this year.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would bet on that. I would venture that they take a little bit of a step back. I can't imagine this unit being worse than a top 25 defense. I think that's a perfectly fine place to be for them.
Yeah.
But they certainly have the pieces that if they're healthy, if they stay healthy, and if they click, it could be a very, very good defense again.
Absolutely. And, going through all the positions, all the groups, and you hear the injuries again, you're just like, how did this team survive and get there? And that just shows on the depth that they have on the team and the coaching ability as well. And, I mentioned with Freeman, early on, that's something I was like, okay, you mentioned it. Is he ready for it? But then they just kept grinding and getting and meshing together, building that camaraderie. And, that's what gives me, more faith going into this season. We'll pull up the 2025 schedule real quick. And, you look at it, you mention it at Miami early, Texas A&M after the bye week. And then you produce not, the danger team that they used to be. You got Arkansas, Boise State. So you got a tough schedule here. I again, people I've seen say it's pretty light. I just don't see how they say that. This is going to be a challenge for a young quarterback. And then you mentioned Chris, Ash coming in and setting that up, getting the groove in. So even if you say week one, crazy situation, you go in, you lose at Miami and the heat and all this other stuff, you get a bye week to kind of reset and just, settle things down and then go at it against Texas A&M, which they're going to be a strong team too. But quarterback there doesn't really scare me like some of the other people I've seen talk about Marcel Reed. And obviously last year was a very tight game, but I think that's winnable for this Notre Dame team. And then once you get past that, there's wins that you can start knocking off and you're making a run for the playoffs. What do you think on this schedule? Is there anything? Obviously, the first two are circled. Boise State probably. What else do you see? That USC game?
Oh, the USC game for sure, especially given all the noise around the rivalry in general right now. You have the added subplot of USC has their general manager was at Notre Dame last year, and the USC fans acting like that was a poach, and the Notre Dame fans acting like, no, we let him go. And, then USC gets a couple of recruiting battle wins against Notre Dame right off the bat. And then USC's Twitter account is more or less subtweeting Notre Dame with a receiver highlight package that was all plays made against Notre Dame. It was kind of funny, actually. I got a chuckle out of
Twitter
that.
Wars.
Yeah. And, the whole war of the words with Chad Bowden talking about Lincoln Riley's the best head coach I've ever been around and blah, blah, blah. And how him and Marcus, I don't know. It's just, it's funny fodder, I guess, but they're going to be juiced for that game. But the overall, it's one of those things. I feel like when fans are looking at a schedule, they judge the schedule by how many tough, like true top elite teams are on this schedule. And right now it appears that there's, depending on, I guess, how you feel about A&M and Miami, there's not really that, Ohio State or Penn State or Oregon or Alabama challenge on there. But when you play 10 Power 4 teams on your schedule, and the two non-Power 4 teams you play, one of them was a playoff team a year ago, and the other one is a team that you have played literally every season since before the Great Depression, and they play a funky offense that is a pain in the ass to prepare for. It's it's the body blow theory, right? Like, you hear the talk about the NHL playoffs, the hits in game one, it's not to get you for game one. It's so by the time you get to game 6, you're feeling it and you're not playing at your best. And
no doubt.
You get I think that's a very advantageous bye week given the fact that you have a first year starting quarterback. It gives you an opportunity that regardless of what happens in that Miami game, whether you win, whether you lose, you have a week to reset, to get a beat, to look at what went well, what didn't go well, and then reset for the next tough game on your schedule, which is a week later against Texas A&M. And then
Yeah.
after that, it's all about surviving, right? Like, I don't anticipate Purdue being much of a challenge, but there's a new coach there with Barry Odom, who I think is a pretty good coach. So,
Mhm.
that's not a situation I think you can overlook. Then you're at Arkansas, which is probably going to be a night game again in SEC country. That is going to be a rabid environment. That is not a game you
Yes.
can overlook, especially with Taylor Green playing quarterback. That some
Agreed.
funky stuff can happen there. Boise State does not have Genty anymore, but this is a team that has slayed some giants in their history, and that's not something that you can discount. NC State and USC before you get to another bye week. I mean, it's just playing that many quality opponents in a row, it adds up. And
It does.
I wonder what, especially when you get to that NC State game, that's 5 games in a row the week before you play USC. What's the mentality of the team? How's everyone feeling at that point? Is that kind of one of those letdown, look ahead situations?
Sure.
And then you finish off. I mean, there's not, after the bye week and then going into November, there's really not a lot in November that stands out to you. At Boston College, that's fine. Navy's fine. At Pitt could be, Pat Narduzzi's always a little spicy.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes. But
And I like Holstein too at quarterback. I think
yeah,
he's pretty solid.
that's true. That's especially if he takes a jump in year 2 of that system, they certainly could have the firepower to get you there. And then how that would be quite literally a great sequel to Rudy if Steve Angeli comes into Notre Dame Stadium on senior day and leads Syracuse to an upset win. But
Oh man.
that was a team that was really good last year, but they got crushed by the portal. So it'll be interesting to see where they're at. And then, I mean, Stanford is a hapless mess. So that's kind of one of those that you don't really have to worry about too much. But it's one of those schedules that, like, what it lacks in, top end, that top end headliner matchup, I think the overall just solidness of this schedule, it's one where you look at and, maybe you do lose to Miami or you lose to Texas A&M. You split those first 2 games and go 1-1. I think there's enough meat on the bone here, especially if a team like NC State or USC or Syracuse, if they are a little bit better than maybe we think, they finish in the back half of that top 25. I think there's enough meat on this schedule that if you do happen to drop a second game, you should still be in that playoff conversation. I'm not comfortable saying that they would definitely get into the playoff as a 10, 11, 12 seed, but
Yeah.
whereas last year, if they lost another game, they were definitively out. I do think that there's a good chance if they did go 10-2 with the schedule, they would be a playoff team. But I mean, we've seen some of the early lines come out. I think they should be favored in every game this year because they're already favored against Miami. They're 7-point favorite against A&M. They're 13-point favorite against USC. And those are the toughest games on the schedule, unless, like I said, they're a little worse than we expect, or someone on the back half of the schedule is a lot better than we expect. They should be favored in every game.
Yeah, from what I saw looking earlier today, they were favored in every game on the schedule. So yeah, it's a solid one, and like you said, it doesn't have like a Bama on there, Ohio State, Oregon, whatever, like you mentioned, but it's just back to back to back of just good teams. Teams that have players. We've covered Boise State in our group of 5, previews, and yeah, they lost Jonty, but they've got guys, man. And Madsen's back at quarterback, and so there's opportunities here. And you mentioned Arkansas too. Last year, they were just a wild team back and forth. It's like they had so many opportunities to win games, but it's like they tried to give it away.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, they beat a playoff team last year.
Yeah, so it's just an interesting team, and I agree. Circle that one for sure. But if you guys can get through that, you say 10-2, I do think that's a playoff team in Notre Dame. It all, again, just how does this young quarterback do off the jump and trial by fire? Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe not even for this season, but depending on how things fall, but just for his building him going forward. It's like, taking from a fire hose, that's the thing I always hear, just, hey, you take and you learn. So we'll see, but that bye week does help a lot. Some numbers from this team, a couple things just to mention. Over under is 10.5. So, I mean, that's right at that line that we're talking about. Returning production numbers, 56% return. And then their S&P plus from Bill Conley, they're at 6th in the country is where they have them. I believe 31st around there on offense, and then about the 10th S&P rated defense. Again, those will change as the weeks go by. And I agree with what you said about defense, even somewhere in between that top 10, 20, somewhere in the top 25, I think this defense will settle. And that's a recipe for getting to the playoffs. Solid offense, move the ball, control the clock, good defense that can take the ball away, but also rush the passer. Health, and obviously the young quarterback will determine this season. Thoughts on you taking the over, going under? What are you feeling on this year before we start closing it out? It's tough.
It's a tough one, man. I am not. I talk about this on our show all the time. I hate betting futures because I don't like having money tied up, and there's a couple that are really tempting. I just find it so hard to bet over on anything that's 10.5 unless it's just like a damn sure thing. Like even Ohio State last year, I was dead sure that they were going over 10.5, and they did not. So I'm gonna chicken out and take the under just because it's that. I've seen Notre Dame at Miami before, and I think it would probably be more accurate to say that instead of feeding CJ Carr through a fire hose, they're going to be feeding him by having Molotov cocktails thrown at him. Because the last time Notre Dame played at Miami was 2017, and the only time Miami fans show up is when Notre Dame is in town, and they show up. They show up, man. That is a prison yard environment. They are nasty and hostile. And that game in 2017, like it's hard, I think, in this day and age, like just with the maturity of some of these kids coming out of high school and how the recruiting process is now, for them to get truly intimidated by an environment. Notre Dame was rattled in that game in 2017. Like I think that was a top 10 matchup at the time. Like Notre Dame's only loss at that point in the season was to Georgia, who ended up playing for the national title that year. So like you win that game and you're firmly in the playoff discussion, and they got smoked.
It was bad.
And that was a very, very experienced team, great offensive line, and they just did not have a hope or a prayer in that game. So there's been some negative scar tissue for Notre Dame at Miami Gardens. So that's a tough one to sit here.
Yeah.
I know Miami's defense was not fantastic last year, and they should be able to run on them. And Miami lost a lot on the offensive side of the ball, including the number 1 overall pick at quarterback. But that's to say if they go 1-1 against A&M and Miami, they're going to be at a very good spot for the rest of the season. But whereas last year with Leonard, after they kind of figured that, hey, we can't have a strong passing game with him, let's just run him. That was kind of a slump-proof offense. You knew he wasn't going to make mistakes. With the nature of having to be a little bit more air it out with a not as mobile quarterback, that I think opens you up, especially with just the overall baseline floor of this schedule. I think that opens you up to maybe getting got at some point if, the quarterback has a bit of a bad game, throws 2 interceptions, or, your defense can't get a stop at an opportune time or something like that. So I think 10-2 seems like a good spot to be for this team. I could see 9-3. I would be shocked if they were anything less than 9-3. I think that would be a failure of a season, but it's a team that should still be in the playoff conversation. And I don't know how Notre Dame fans will feel about that, given what happened last year, because, you really can't get better unless you win a national title. And I don't know if that's necessarily in the cards this year. I mean, I guess CJ Carr could come out and be, Joe Burrow reincarnated, but that would be surprising as well.
Yeah, it's for me, when you talk about national title contenders, it's continuity of staff, veteran quarterback, schedule set up, and then, good returning production, not just, returning production like you saw from Oklahoma State last year, top of the country, and then folded. But sorry, Oklahoma State fans, if you're watching, I had to.
Catching strays.
But it's like good returning production. I think obviously they fit a lot of those, but not all of them. So we'll see. I'm kind of with you in that 9 to 10 range. I think 10 seems more likely, just with the running ability in the offensive line and solid defensive pieces. But it's hard to see a young quarterback, taking them all the way. But hell, maybe it happens. Who knows? There's so much new starting quarterbacks in the league this year. It's going to be interesting.
Yep.
But yeah, we appreciate you coming on, man, and talking Notre Dame, and it really a lot of hype around this team, preseason from all the national media. So it's good to get an inside fan perspective and what you're seeing from this Notre Dame squad. anything you want to plug from your podcast, your show, talk to you guys all the time on Twitter. Where else can people find you?
Yeah, well, first, Brendan, appreciate you having me on here. I had a lot of fun. I could talk about this all day and all night. This is, especially this time of year, I have completely divested from the NHL playoffs. So we're in June. The football game's coming out next month. It's time to switch gears and start getting ready for football. So this was a lot of fun. Anyone listening, you can find us on Twitter at ITPCFB. We are a Midwest college football podcast. It's more or less a Big Ten college football podcast, but we throw the Midwest in there to cover Notre Dame, and we get a little bit of Mid-American Conference, some action in there as well. Yeah. That is the same place you can find us on YouTube as well. You can subscribe to that channel. We are audio only, no written content, but you can find us in your podcast feed, Inside the Pylon, a Midwest college football podcast, wherever you get them, Apple or Spotify. We're shooting once a week now through June, Monday nights at 9 p.m. We'll go live on YouTube for those, and then in July, we are going to start our fall preview series where we try to find a beat writer for every team in the Big Ten plus Notre Dame. So we're doing 19 individual fall previews for those. Wow. Those will be fun to check out. We had a lot of fun with those last year. It was a lot of work putting it together. I'm sure you know what that's like, trying to wrangle people, coordinate schedules and everything. And it's an adventure, but it was worth it. We had some pretty good responses to that. So we'll be doing that again in July. And then once August comes around and the season gets ramped up, we go 3 times a week. We go Sunday night, Monday night, and Thursday nights, all at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm finally back in college football mode. My bandwidth it's hard for me to pay attention to more than one sport at a time, which is probably a personal problem. So
no, I'm kind of that way too, man.
took a little bit of a break after the lengthy college football season, and excited to get back into it now.
Oh yeah, man. Well, again, we appreciate you, and you guys go check him out. Make sure you follow him and subscribe, and follow and subscribe to us. Any Notre Dame fans, if you're the first time watching us, we appreciate you, and share with your buddies and let us know what you think. What are we missing out? Why do you think they might go the national title again? Tell us what you think in the comments, and of course, we appreciate you guys. Have a great night. We'll see you around on the next one.